Harold Benson read the text message twice, not because the words were hard, but because they landed like ice water down the back of his neck. Don't expect us to take care of you. We have our own life. The message came from Erin, his only daughter. It was 7:14 a.m. in Cleveland, Ohio. Outside his kitchen window, Lake Erie wind pushed snow against the glass, and the streetlights still glowed in the gray. Harold didn't type a paragraph. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long second. Then he wrote one word. Okay. Then he did something Erin never imagined he could do. He printed the message. He slid the paper into a plain manila folder and wrote a single word on the tab in block letters. Documentation. He set it next to his coffee mug like it belonged there, like proof could be part of breakfast. Within a week, Harold walked into a KeyBank branch near West Park. Snow still crusted on the cuffs of his boots, and he quietly closed an old joint account Erin had insisted on helping with years ago. The teller asked if he was sure. Harold nodded once. Within 2 weeks, he sat across from a probate attorney in a small office that smelled like paper and winter coats. Harold listened, asked practical questions, and signed papers to create a living trust. Not to punish, not for revenge, to protect what he had built with his hands, because Harold Benson was not helpless. He was 74, a widower, a former factory mechanic who could still fix a neighbor's furnace with a pocket flashlight and a roll of tape. He took a morning walk, even in heavy snow, because he refused to let grief turn him into a man who stayed in bed. But grief had been living in his house for 2 years. It lived in the empty chair at the table. It lived in the quiet after the TV turned off. It lived in the way Harold still bought the cereal his grandkids liked, even when they stopped coming. Erin and her husband Mark told people they were worried about Harold's health. They smiled at church. They offered to look into assisted living. They spoke in soft voices like caring adults. Behind closed doors, they talked about credit card bills, a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and the money they assumed would be theirs when Harold finally couldn't manage. And when Harold said, "Okay" to that text, they thought it meant surrender. They were wrong. If you've ever watched someone use family as a weapon, stay with this story. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us what city you're listening from. Because what happens next isn't loud at first. It's quiet. It's paperwork. It's patience. And it ends with a folder labeled documentation sitting on a table while the truth finally gets read out loud. Harold Benson's day started the same way it had for decades, long before retirement, long before the funeral, long before the house got too quiet. At 6:10 a.m., he turned on the kitchen light and listened to the old furnace kick in. The sound mattered. It meant heat. It meant the system was still doing its job. Harold's mind worked like that. Check the basics, then move on. He filled the kettle, made plain oatmeal, and set 2 bowls on the table by habit. One stayed empty. He noticed it every morning, then put it back in the cabinet like a man putting a bruise under a sleeve. By 6:45, he pulled on a worn winter coat, a knit cap, and gloves with a small tear on the thumb. Snow had fallen all night. Cleveland streets were covered in fresh white that looked clean until cars made slush. Harold stepped carefully down his porch stairs and started his walk. He didn't walk for exercise alone. He walked because staying still felt dangerous. It gave grief too much room to talk. He passed the same houses, the same bare trees, the same frozen lawns. A neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, waved from a driveway while scraping ice. Harold lifted his hand back. 2 blocks later, he stopped at Mrs. Lasky's place and checked the side gate that always froze shut. He gave it a quick kick near the hinge, and it popped loose. "Still a miracle worker?" Mrs. Lasky called through her door. "Just stubborn," Harold answered, and kept moving. That was Harold. Pride, but simple pride, not ego. The kind that came from fixing things, paying bills on time, and not asking anyone to carry what he could carry himself. When the walk was done, his boots left wet tracks across the kitchen floor. He wiped them with an old towel. He kept his house clean because it was one of the few places left where he could control the outcome. On Sundays, Harold went to the local church, a modest brick building with a parking lot full of salt stains and pickup trucks. He didn't go for show. He went because he needed faces, voices, and a reason to iron a shirt. The church had a small men's group that met after service in the basement, next to a table of donuts and a coffee pot that tasted like it had been there since the 1980s. Harold usually stayed 10 minutes, sometimes 20 if someone mentioned a busted sink or a shaky porch step. That winter, people started asking about Aaron more often. "How's your girl doing?" one woman asked, smiling in that way people do when they think family is always the answer. Harold's smile tightened. "She's busy," he said. Busy. It was the safest word. It didn't confess anything. It didn't invite advice. Aaron used to bring the grandkids to church on Christmas Eve. The kids would squirm in the pew and whisper about the cookies after service. Harold would keep his hand on the back of the bench, feeling their small movements like proof he still belonged to something. Then the visits got shorter. Then the excuses got cleaner. Then there were months of nothing. Sometimes Aaron called, but the calls felt like check-ins from a distance. "You okay, Dad? Eating? Taking your meds?" She asked those questions like a nurse, not like a daughter. Mark was worse. Mark talked like a man doing a favor just by speaking. "You know, Harold, winter's rough. You shouldn't be alone like this," he'd say. "We can look into options. There are places." Places. Assisted living. The words floated around Harold's kitchen like smoke, never direct enough to grab, always thick enough to choke. Harold didn't fight them at first. He nodded, gave short answers, and changed the subject to safe things like weather or a broken tail light. But then the small things started. A card came in the mail from Aaron with a handwritten note. "Hope you're staying warm. Mark found a great community. We can talk soon." Inside the envelope was a brochure for an assisted living facility with smiling seniors on the cover. Harold looked at the picture and felt nothing but a cold, practical question. Who was paying for that brochure? A week later, Harold checked his bank statement at the kitchen table. He still liked paper. He circled numbers with a pen. It was how he had managed money his whole life. Slow, careful, visible. That morning, he saw something he didn't recognize. A small withdrawal. Not huge. Just enough to make him frown. It was listed as an online transfer from an account he hadn't used in years. An old joint account Aaron had been on, just in case. Harold stared at it. One transfer could be a mistake. One transfer could be a test. He looked at the clock, then at the snow coming down again, thick and steady. What kind of daughter starts moving money without asking? Harold didn't call Aaron right away. He opened a drawer, pulled out a small box of office supplies, and found an old printer paper pack. He printed the bank statement, circled the transfer, and slid it into a folder. He didn't have a label yet. He just knew he needed one. Because something had shifted, not in the weather, in the people closest to him. And once Harold noticed the shift, he couldn't unsee it. Later that day, Harold drove to the neighborhood diner, the one with vinyl booths and a bell over the door that rang like a small warning. The place was warm, smelled like bacon grease and coffee, and everyone had the same tired winter face. He ordered the same thing he always did: 2 eggs, toast, and black coffee. The waitress, Donna, poured his cup without asking. "You hear from Aaron?" she asked, like it was normal to ask. People did that in neighborhoods that had watched a family grow up. "Not lately," Harold said. Donna nodded slowly. "Kids get busy." Harold didn't correct her. He didn't say that busy can also mean avoiding. He didn't say that his grandkids' voices used to fill his living room, and now the house made sounds like a place that had given up. He ate in silence for a moment, watching a couple argue softly 2 booths over. Donna set the check down and, without meaning to, glanced at the folder corner sticking out of Harold's coat pocket. "You working on something?" she asked. "Just keeping track," Harold replied. "Good," Donna said. "You're the kind of man who keeps track. Don't stop." Harold paid, left a normal tip, and walked back out into the snow. His truck took longer to start than usual, the engine turning over like it had to think about it. Harold waited, hands steady on the wheel. He thought about the transfer again. He thought about Erin's tone the last time she called. He thought about how Mark always pushed the idea of options right after asking about money. Then his phone buzzed. A new message. Harold glanced at the screen, and his stomach tightened before he even read it. The message on Harold's phone was short, casual, and somehow sharper than a raised voice. Erin: "Dad, don't freak out, but I moved a little money to cover something temporary. We'll put it back. You shouldn't be stressing about bills anyway." Harold sat in the truck with the heater blowing weakly at his boots. Snowflakes hit the windshield and melted into streaks. He read the words twice, then once more. A little money. Temporary. We'll put it back. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of control. Harold didn't answer from the parking lot. He drove home slowly, careful on the slick roads, careful with his breath. He knew his temper. He knew how fast anger could turn into a mistake. Inside the house, he hung up his coat, took off his boots, and went straight to the printer. The bank statement was already in the tray. He printed Erin's message from his phone, not because he wanted to be dramatic, but because he wanted reality to exist on paper. The page slid out warm. Harold held it for a second, feeling the heat, then placed it on the table next to the circled statement. He opened the drawer again and found a black marker. Documentation. He wrote it on the folder tab in clean, straight letters, the way he used to label parts bins at the factory. Then he slid both pages inside like they were bolts and screws he might need later. When Erin finally called, it was early evening. The sky outside had turned that dark Cleveland blue that comes before a real night. Harold let the phone ring twice before he picked up. "Dad?" Erin said, and her voice had that bright, forced cheer. "Okay, so, listen, it's not a big deal. Mark and I had a situation. We're handling it." "What situation?" Harold asked. A pause. "Just life, you know. The car, the kids. Things are expensive." Harold leaned against the counter. "You took money without asking." "We didn't take," Erin corrected, too fast. "You put my name on that account. It's for emergencies." "Whose emergency?" Harold asked. Another pause. "Dad, don't do this. We're worried about you. You've been alone since Mom passed. You shouldn't be dealing with financial stress." Harold stared at the empty chair by the table. The chair didn't answer back. It just sat there, like it always did. "I deal with my own stress," Harold said. "I always have." Erin sighed like a tired parent. "You're being stubborn. Mark says you don't see what winter does to older people. Falls, accidents, and then what? Who's going to be there? We have our own life." There it was again. The same phrase as the text, slipped into the call like it was a fact everyone should accept. Harold's jaw tightened. "So you can take money, but you can't take responsibility." "That's not what anyone said," Erin snapped, and the mask cracked for half a second. Then she softened again. "Look, Dad, we're just trying to help. We're even looking at assisted living, a place near us. It would be safer. The kids could visit." The kids could visit. Harold felt a sting behind his eyes that he didn't allow to turn into tears. The grandkids were the lever. Erin knew it. "How often do they visit now?" Harold asked quietly. Erin didn't answer that. Mark's voice came through in the background, low and impatient. Erin covered the phone with her hand like Harold couldn't hear. Then Aaron came back. "Dad, don't make this harder. We'll come by this weekend. We'll talk. Just don't do anything extreme." Extreme, like asking for respect. Harold ended the call with a short, controlled goodbye. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He looked down at the printed message on the table, and something in him settled into place. He wasn't imagining it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. That night Harold didn't sleep well. Wind rattled the window frames. Snow tapped the glass. He got up at 2:11 a.m. and walked the dark hallway, passing family photos that were starting to feel like evidence of a life Aaron was trying to rewrite. At the kitchen table, he opened the documentation folder again. The pages inside looked small, almost harmless. But Harold knew better. Paper is quiet. Paper doesn't shout. Paper waits. In the morning, he made another decision. Not a loud decision, a practical one. He wrote down 3 names from church, men he trusted, people who had known him and his wife for years. Then he wrote one more phrase, underlined twice: probate attorney. Because if Aaron and Mark were moving in the shadows, Harold was going to bring a flashlight. And in a Cleveland winter, a man without a flashlight can disappear. On Wednesday, Harold went back to church, not for service this time, but for the midweek coffee hour that the older members treated like a lifeline. The parking lot was a sheet of packed snow, and Harold walked carefully, using his car door for balance before he moved. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like cheap coffee and powdered creamer. People talked about the weather, the Browns, and whose grandson had just started a new job. Harold listened more than he spoke. Pastor Lewis caught him near the coat rack. "Harold, you doing okay?" the pastor asked, voice low. Harold nodded. "Doing." The pastor studied his face. "You've been quiet lately." Harold forced a small smile. "Not much to say." They didn't talk long, but Harold noticed something. When Aaron and Mark were mentioned, the pastor's expression tightened just slightly, like a man remembering a difficult conversation. Before Harold could ask, his phone buzzed again. An email. Subject: Dad. Important paperwork. Harold opened it at the coffee table in the church basement, right next to a tray of donuts. Attached were forms. Medical release forms, a blank financial authorization form, and a short message from Mark. "Mark, we need this in place for your safety. If anything happens, we can step in. Sign and send back today." Harold's hands went cold, even in the warm basement. He read it again. Step in. Today. No discussion. No respect. Just pressure. A man from the men's group, Frank Dwyer, saw Harold's face and lowered his voice. "Everything all right?" Frank asked. Harold folded the phone screen down like he could hide the words from the room. "Family stuff," he said. Frank's eyes stayed on him. "Family can be complicated," he said. "If you ever need someone to sit with you somewhere, you call me." Harold nodded once. He didn't trust himself to speak. He drove home through falling snow, the wipers squeaking across the glass. At a red light, he thought about his wife, Susan, and how she used to handle Aaron. "Set your boundaries early," Susan would say, "or they'll set them for you." Harold pulled into his driveway and sat there for a full minute with the engine running. Then he went inside, printed the email, and added it to the documentation folder. 3 pieces of paper now, 3 quiet punches. And Harold understood something else, something heavier. Aaron and Mark weren't just trying to borrow money. They were trying to take authority, and once someone starts reaching for that, they rarely stop. Harold didn't sleep much after the email. He kept hearing Mark's words in his head. Sign and send back today. It wasn't concern. It was urgency, the kind that shows up when someone is trying to lock a door before the other person realizes they still have the key. On Thursday morning, Harold did his walk even though the snow was deeper and the wind cut through his coat. His breath came out in thick clouds. His boots crunched. His joints complained. He kept going anyway. He stopped in front of Aaron's old elementary school for no real reason, just because the route took him there. The building looked the same. For a second, he pictured Aaron as a kid with messy hair, coming home with a scraped knee. Harold had fixed her bike chain so many times he could still feel the grease under his nails. How did that girl become a woman who moved money behind his back? Harold returned home and made coffee. He sat at the table with his bank papers spread out like a mechanic laying tools in order. The joint account was old. Aaron's name had been added years ago when Susan got sick. Aaron had said it was just to make things easier. Susan had agreed, because Susan trusted her daughter. Harold trusted Susan. He didn't question it then. Now Harold pulled every statement he could find for that account and laid them in a neat stack. He circled the recent transfer again, then scanned the pages before it. There were other transfers. Smaller. Quiet. Easy to miss if a man wasn't looking for them. Harold's stomach tightened as he counted. 3 transfers in the last 6 months. 1 temporary emergency in April, another in June, another in October. Harold looked at the totals and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't a single mistake. This was a pattern. He took a yellow legal pad and wrote the dates down. Then he wrote the amounts. Then he wrote a simple question next to each one. What was the emergency? He didn't have answers yet, but he didn't need them to make the next move. At 9:30 a.m., Harold put on his coat again and drove to the KeyBank branch he had used since before Aaron was born. The parking lot had been plowed, but the snowbanks were taller than the hood of his truck. He walked carefully to the doors, feeling the cold bite into his cheeks. Inside, the branch was bright and quiet. A few people waited in chairs. A TV played muted news. Harold approached the counter and asked politely to speak to someone about account history. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse anyone. He spoke the way he always did, with practical clarity. A banker named Ms. Patel met him at a small desk. Harold showed his ID and explained in simple terms that he wanted transaction details and authorization records. Ms. Patel's face stayed professional, but her eyes sharpened in interest. Mr. Benson, because it's a joint account, both parties have access, she said carefully. But I can print the transaction log. I want the log, Harold said. Ms. Patel typed for a few minutes, then turned the screen slightly so Harold could see. The transfers weren't random. They were linked to a checking account Aaron used at another bank. The descriptions were vague. The frequency was irregular, like someone trying not to leave a trail. Ms. Patel printed the log and handed it to Harold in a thin packet. Harold thanked her, took the papers, and felt the weight of them in his hands like a brick. He didn't open them right away. He walked out, got into his truck, and sat there breathing. Then he opened the packet. There were notes in the system, requests, calls, a record of Aaron contacting the bank earlier in the year, asking how quickly transfers could be made, asking about daily limits, asking what would trigger a fraud alert. Harold stared at that line. Trigger a fraud alert. So Aaron had been thinking about this, planning. He took the packet home, printed another copy for safety, and placed both in the documentation folder. By the time the folder closed, Harold's hands were steady again. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't collapsing. He was doing what he had always done when a machine started failing. Diagnose it. Find the pattern. Fix it. That afternoon, a knock came at his door. It was Mr. Alvarez from down the street holding a small toolbox. "You still got that socket set?" he asked. "My snowblower won't start. I know you said you could take a look." Harold almost said no. His mind was full. His chest felt tight. Then he said yes, because helping a neighbor reminded him who he was. In Mr. Alvarez's garage, Harold opened the snowblower casing and found the issue in 5 minutes, a clogged fuel line. He cleared it, tightened a clamp, and the machine roared to life. Mr. Alvarez grinned. "Man, I don't know what I'd do without you." Harold wiped his hands on a rag. "You'd figure it out," he said. Mr. Alvarez's smile faded a little, like he sensed something under Harold's calm. "Everything okay with your family?" he asked. Harold hesitated. Then, for the first time, he spoke the truth to another person. "They're trying to take over," he said quietly. Mr. Alvarez didn't react like a gossip. He reacted like a man who understood pressure. "Then you protect yourself," he said. "You don't owe anyone your life just because they share your blood." That sentence hit Harold harder than he expected. Limits are not cruelty, Harold thought. Limits are dignity. And that night, Harold made another decision. He wasn't going to just close an account. He was going to understand exactly what Aaron and Mark were hiding, because the deeper a person hides, the more they're afraid of the light. On Friday, Harold stopped at the diner again. Not because he was hungry, because the diner was where the neighborhood talked without trying to. Donna slid him into his usual booth. "You look like you've been carrying a cinder block," she said. "Just winter," Harold replied. As he stirred his coffee, he overheard 2 men at the counter talking about Mark. One of them had worked with Mark's cousin years ago. "Mark pulled up to the school in a new SUV," one man said. "That thing's not cheap." "Must be doing well," the other replied. Harold kept his eyes on his cup, but his ears stayed open. New SUV, expensive, and yet Aaron claimed they were in a situation. When Donna came back, Harold asked without looking up, "You ever see Aaron and Mark in here?" "Not in a while," Donna said. "Last time they came, Mark paid with a stack of cards like he was trying to find the one that worked." Harold's spoon stopped moving. A stack of cards. He didn't need a full confession. He didn't need a spreadsheet to feel the truth forming. Debt makes people desperate. Desperate people reach for shortcuts, and right now, Aaron and Mark were reaching for him. The probate attorney's office was in a low building near a strip of shops, the kind of place people drove past without noticing. The parking lot was half covered in snow, and Harold's boots left deep prints as he walked to the door. Inside, the air smelled like paper, ink, and winter coats drying. A small space heater hummed in the corner. The receptionist asked Harold to fill out a form with his name, address, and a list of family members. Harold wrote neatly, "Harold Benson, 74, widower, 1 child, Aaron Benson, 2 grandchildren." He paused with the pen above the grandchildren line. He loved those kids. He missed them so much it sometimes felt physical, like a tight band around his ribs. But love didn't mean surrender. Love didn't mean letting someone use him as a wallet and a puppet. When the attorney came out, he was a calm man in his 50s named Daniel Kessler. He shook Harold's hand firmly and led him into a small office with 2 chairs and a desk stacked with files. "What brings you in today, Mr. Benson?" Kessler asked. Harold didn't dramatize it. He took the printed text message from his coat pocket and placed it on the desk. Then he took out the bank log and the email from Mark, the one demanding signatures. Kessler looked at the papers carefully. He didn't smile. He didn't judge. He just read. "Do you have a current will?" Kessler asked. "Yes," Harold said. "Old. My wife and I did it years ago." "Thatch? And do you have any powers of attorney signed?" Kessler asked. "No," Harold said, and something in him relaxed a little. "Not yet." Kessler nodded. "That's good. This email is a red flag. Pressuring someone to sign authority documents quickly is not normal family planning." Harold's jaw tightened. "They keep saying it's for my safety." Kessler leaned back. "Safety can be real, but control can hide inside that word." He tapped the printed text. This message is also blunt. Harold didn't flinch. It's clear. Kessler studied Harold's face. What do you want, Mr. Benson? Harold answered without hesitation. To stay in my home, to keep my independence, to make sure no one can take what I worked for. Kessler nodded once. Then we can do that. We can set up a living trust. It lets you manage your property while you're alive and outlines what happens when you pass. It also helps avoid some probate delays. It can include protections. Protections. Harold liked that word. Over the next hour, Harold asked practical questions. How did a trust work? Who could be trustee? What documents mattered? What did it cost? Kessler answered in plain language. Harold chose a professional trustee option Kessler recommended, and he also named a backup, Frank Dwyer from church, someone who would not be impressed by Aaron's tears or Mark's anger. Kessler explained that Harold could still leave money to his grandchildren, but he could do it in a controlled way. Funds released for education, health, or specific milestones, not handed over to Aaron and Mark to manage. Harold's throat tightened. I want the kids protected, he said. That can be written, Kessler said. When they finished, Harold signed the first set of documents. His hand didn't shake. His signature looked like the same man who had signed mortgage papers, factory forms, and hospital paperwork for his wife. Not a weak-old man, a man who made decisions. Kessler slid the documents into a thick envelope, sealed it, and wrote Harold's name on the front. Keep this somewhere safe, he said, and keep copies. Harold held the envelope like it was a tool he had been missing for years. On the way home, Harold drove to KeyBank again. He waited in line, listened to the quiet hum of the lobby, then sat with Ms. Patel. I want to close that joint account, Harold said. Ms. Patel looked at him. Are you sure? Once it's closed, it can cause conflict. Harold's eyes stayed steady. Conflict is already here, he said. Ms. Patel nodded. She processed the closure and asked where Harold wanted the remaining funds transferred. Harold provided the new account information he had opened, an account with only his name. It was a simple move, almost boring on paper, but it cut a cord Aaron had been holding for years. Harold walked out of the bank into falling snow with the receipt in his pocket and the attorney's envelope under his arm. That evening, his phone rang. Aaron. Harold let it ring once, then twice, then answered. Her voice came through hot and sharp. Dad, what did you do? Harold leaned against the counter again, the same spot as before. What are you talking about? He asked, calm. The account, Aaron said. The account is gone. I tried to move money back, and it wouldn't go through. Harold's stomach stayed steady. That account isn't available anymore, he said. Aaron's breathing changed. Why would you do that without telling me? Harold almost laughed. Almost. Why would you move money without telling me? He asked. Aaron's voice rose. You're acting like we're stealing from you. We're your family. Harold looked at the documentation folder on the table. He thought about Susan's voice. Set your boundaries early. He spoke quietly, and that quiet made it worse for Aaron. You told me not to expect you to take care of me, Harold said. So I'm taking care of myself. There was silence on the line. Not silence like peace, silence like a door closing. Then Mark's voice cut in, loud enough to hear without speaker. This is ridiculous. He's being manipulated. Manipulated. Harold's eyes narrowed. No, he said. I'm being clear. Aaron's tone shifted suddenly, softer, almost pleading. Dad, please, let's not do this. We can come over. We can talk. Harold's answer stayed small and final. You can come, but the money stays where it is. Aaron hung up without saying goodbye, and Harold understood with a cold certainty that the moment he chose dignity, they would choose war. The question was not if they would retaliate, It was how far they would go. 2 days later, Harold got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered, and a cheerful voice introduced herself as a coordinator from an assisted living facility. "Mr. Benson, we're just following up," she said. "Your daughter indicated you were interested in a tour and a move-in timeline." Harold's jaw tightened. "I did not indicate that," he said. A pause. "Oh, I'm sorry. We have notes that your family is concerned about your ability to live independently." Harold looked around his kitchen. The clean counters, the repaired cabinet hinge, the labeled spice jars Susan had once organized. His hands had built this life. His hands still ran it. "I'm capable," Harold said. "Remove my name from anything you have." The coordinator apologized again, but the damage was done. Aaron and Mark weren't waiting for agreement. They were creating a story around him. Harold ended the call, sat down, and opened the documentation folder. He added the date and time on the top margin of a fresh page and wrote what the coordinator said, word for word. Then he stared at the attorney's sealed envelope on the counter. If Aaron and Mark were already making calls on his behalf, what else were they doing? And who else had they told their version of Harold Benson? They came on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of gray day when snow looks like it's thinking about falling again. Harold heard the tires crunch in the driveway before he heard the knock. A moment later there was pounding on the door, not a polite tap. Pounding like someone had already decided they owned the house. Harold didn't rush. He walked to the door, steady, and opened it. Erin stood on the porch with her cheeks red from cold and anger. Mark stood half a step behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the doorway like he was sizing up a room to renovate. "We need to talk," Erin said. Harold stepped back. "Then come in," he said. They didn't take off their shoes. They didn't ask if he wanted them there. Erin walked straight into the kitchen like she was late for a meeting, and Mark followed, already looking at the table. The documentation folder sat there, plain and quiet. Erin's eyes went to it immediately. "What's that?" she asked. "A folder," Harold said. Mark's mouth tightened. "Dad, you're making this into something it's not," he said. "We're trying to protect you." "And Harold leaned against the counter, the same spot again, like a habit of calm. "You're trying to protect yourselves," he said. Erin's face flashed. "That's not fair." Harold didn't raise his voice. "You moved money. You sent me paperwork to sign today. You called a facility and told them I was interested. That's not concern. That's control." Erin's eyes widened, offended. "I didn't—" Harold lifted a hand. Not aggressive, just a stop sign. "Don't," he said. "Don't lie in my kitchen." Silence dropped for a second, heavy and sharp. Then Mark stepped closer to the table. "What's in the folder?" he asked again, voice lower. Harold watched him. A man who wanted to know what evidence existed before he chose his next move. "You don't need to know," Harold said. Erin's voice turned syrupy, the voice she used in public. "Dad, listen. You're upset. You're grieving. You've been alone, and it's messing with your judgment. Let's do this the easy way. We find you a safe place. We handle the paperwork. Everyone relaxes." Harold's stomach tightened at the word handle. He thought of his wife's hands in his the night before she died. He thought of how she trusted him to keep the home, the family, the dignity. "You're not handling anything for me," Harold said. Mark laughed once, a short sound with no humor. "You can't do this alone forever," he said. "What happens when you fall? What happens when your mind starts slipping?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "My mind isn't slipping," he said. Erin took a step forward. "Dad, we're worried, and if you won't accept help, we might have to make decisions for you." There it was. The real weapon finally shone. Harold felt his chest tighten, but he kept his face still. "What decisions?" he asked. Mark spoke before Aaron could soften it. "Guardianship," he said. "A court can appoint someone. It happens all the time. We can prove you're not safe." Harold stared at him. "What kind of son-in-law threatens a court in a family kitchen?" Aaron's eyes flicked to Mark, then back to Harold. "We don't want that," she said quickly. "But you're forcing us." Harold looked at Aaron's face and saw both versions at once, the little girl with scraped knees and the adult woman doing math with her father's life. He spoke slowly. "You're not forcing anything," he said. "You're choosing it." Mark stepped toward the folder again. His hand moved, small and quick, like he was going to grab it. Harold's voice sharpened for the first time. "Don't touch that," he said. Mark froze, then smiled in a way that made Harold's skin crawl. "Why? What are you hiding?" Mark asked. Harold didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Aaron's eyes widened. "Dad, who are you calling?" she demanded. Harold looked at her. "A witness," he said. He called Frank Dwyer from church. Frank answered on the second ring. "Frank," Harold said steady, "I need you to come over. Now." Frank didn't ask for details. "I'm on my way," he said. Aaron's face flushed. "You're embarrassing us," she hissed. Harold didn't blink. "You embarrassed yourselves," he said. Mark's jaw tightened. "This is insane," he said. "You're turning your own family into enemies." Harold's voice stayed low. "You did that when you sent that text," he said. Aaron flinched like the words slapped her. "That text, Dad, you're taking it too literally," she said. "It was emotional. We were stressed." Harold reached for the folder, opened it, and slid the printed text message across the table. The paper was plain. The words were not. Aaron stared at it. For a second, she looked like she might cry. Then she looked up, eyes hard again. "So what?" she said. "You're going to cut us off? Punish us?" Harold shook his head once. "No," he said. "I'm going to set limits." Mark scoffed. "Limits don't matter if you can't prove you're competent," he said. "We can get a doctor. We can get an evaluation. We can tell the court you're confused." Harold's stomach turned. Not fear. Disgust. Then a car door slammed outside. Frank's truck. Harold heard boots on the porch. The door opened and Frank stepped into the kitchen, shaking snow from his coat. He looked at Aaron. He looked at Mark. Then he looked at Harold. "What's going on?" Frank asked. Harold didn't point. He didn't accuse. He just said, "They're threatening me." Frank's eyes went cold. "Not in this house," he said. Aaron's voice rose. "This is our family business. He's overreacting." Frank stepped closer, calm but solid. "Then leave," he said. "If you're here to threaten, you leave." Mark's face tightened. He looked from Frank to Harold to the folder. He was calculating, deciding what looked good if someone asked later. Aaron's shoulders lifted with shaky anger. "Fine," she snapped. "We'll do this the official way." She pointed at Harold like a warning. "Don't think this is over." Then she turned and walked out. Mark followed, but at the doorway he paused and looked back. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said quietly. Harold didn't answer. He watched the door close. He listened to their car back out of the driveway. He stood there in the kitchen while the furnace kicked on again, steady as a heartbeat. Frank exhaled. "Harold," he said, "you need to call that attorney again." Harold nodded slowly. His hands were still steady, but inside he knew the temperature had dropped. Because now it wasn't just a family argument. It was a fight over legal power. And Aaron and Mark had just told him how far they were willing to go. The next move wasn't a court filing. It was flowers. On Monday morning, Harold opened his front door and found a bouquet on the porch, wrapped in plastic, the stems already drooping from the cold. A card was taped to it. Dad, we love you. Please don't let stress do this. The kids miss you. Aaron. Harold stared at the handwriting. It looked familiar. It looked like his daughter's hand. But the words felt like a script. He brought the flowers inside and set them on the counter without trimming the stems. He didn't throw them away. He didn't put them in the center of the table either. He left them where they were, like a prop. Then he opened the documentation folder and placed the card inside. A gift with strings was still evidence. That afternoon, Harold got another message. Not from Aaron. From a number he didn't recognize. Unknown. Hello, Mr. Benson. This is Mark. Aaron is too upset to talk. We just want peace. Can we bring the kids by tonight? Harold read it, and his throat tightened. The kids. The lever again. He didn't answer right away. He walked through his living room and stopped by the shelf where photos sat in frames. One was from a summer picnic. The grandkids holding popsicles. Harold squinting into the sun. Susan laughing beside him. That picture was from before the busy excuses, before the transfers, before guardianship became a threat. Harold sat down and typed a short response. Harold, you can bring them by Saturday afternoon. 1 hour, no paperwork, no arguments. His thumb hovered, then he added one more line. Harold, if anyone tries to pressure or threaten, the visit ends. He hit send. For the rest of the week, Erin played the role she needed. At church on Wednesday night, she showed up unexpectedly, cheeks flushed like she had rushed through snow. Pastor Lewis was there, and people noticed. Erin hugged women from the choir and spoke in a soft voice. My dad has been struggling, she said, loud enough for the right people to hear. We're just trying to keep him safe. Harold wasn't there that night, but Frank was. Frank later told Harold what Erin said, word for word. She's building a story, Frank warned. She wants people to believe you're unstable. Harold nodded and added it to the folder, date, time, what was said, who heard it. On Friday, a letter arrived in the mail. Official-looking, typed. No greeting. It was from Mark. He wrote that Harold's recent behavior was concerning, that family members had observed confusion, that Erin and Mark were prepared to seek appropriate intervention if Harold continued to make reckless decisions. At the bottom, Mark included a list of examples with dates. Harold read it once, then again, feeling his stomach turn. Mark had selected moments. Harold forgetting to return a call. Harold being late to one church event. Harold asking Donna at the diner to repeat herself because the kitchen was loud. Normal life moments. Mark had turned them into a case. Harold didn't tear the letter up. He didn't scream. He walked to the printer and made a copy. Then he filed both versions in documentation. Saturday arrived with heavy snow. The streets were plowed, but the air was white and thick. Harold shoveled his porch steps slowly, taking breaks, moving with the steady rhythm he'd used his whole life. At 2:03 p.m., Erin's car pulled into the driveway. 2 small faces appeared in the back seat. Harold's chest tightened. He opened the door before they even knocked. The grandkids ran up the porch, boots clomping, and for a moment the house sounded alive again. Harold knelt awkwardly, hugged them, and inhaled the smell of winter coats and cheap fruit gum. "Grandpa!" one of them yelled. Harold smiled. It almost hurt. Erin stepped in behind them, eyes scanning the house. Mark followed, holding a small bag like he was bringing supplies to a patient. Erin's voice was soft. "Dad," she said, "can we talk privately?" Harold looked at the kids. "Not today," he said. "The hour is for them." Erin's mouth tightened, but she forced a smile. "Of course," she said. For 20 minutes the kids played with an old puzzle on the living room rug. Harold sat with them, helped fit pieces together, Listen to their stories about school. Then Mark moved. He sat on the couch closer to Harold and lowered his voice. "We brought something for you," he said. He pulled out papers. Harold's eyes narrowed. "No paperwork," he said. Mark smiled, like Harold was being unreasonable. "This isn't paperwork. It's just a plan, a safety plan. If you sign, it shows you're cooperative. It looks good. Looks good." Harold felt something cold in his chest. "It looks good for who?" he asked. Aaron leaned forward, voice trembling like a performance. "Dad, please, don't do this. Don't make us do the court thing." Harold glanced at the kids, who were now watching quietly, sensing tension. He stood up slowly, careful not to loom. "Mark," Harold said, "put those papers away." Mark's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. Harold's voice stayed calm. "The visit ends," he said. Aaron's face flashed with anger. "You can't do that," she snapped, forgetting the kids for a second. "We brought them here. They're his grandparents." Harold's eyes hardened. "Don't use them," he said. "Not in my house." For a second, Aaron looked like she might cry again. Then she looked at Mark, and the mask fell completely. "You see?" Aaron said, loud now. "He's unstable. He's paranoid. He thinks everyone is against him." Harold's hand stayed at his sides. His voice stayed low. "I think you're in debt," he said. "And I think you're trying to solve it with my life." Mark stood up fast. "You don't know anything," he snapped. Harold didn't argue. He walked to the table, picked up the documentation folder, and held it in his hand like a shield. "I know enough," he said. The room went quiet. Even the kids stopped moving. And in that quiet, Aaron made a choice. She grabbed the kids' coats and said through clenched teeth, "Fine, we'll let the court decide." Then she pulled the kids toward the door. One of them looked back at Harold, confused. "Grandpa," the child whispered. Harold swallowed hard. He forced a gentle smile. "I love you," he said. "Always." The door closed. The car backed out. The house went silent again. Harold stood in the living room with the folder in his hand, feeling the empty space settle back into place. How long had this been planned? And what would Aaron do next, now that sweetness didn't work? The papers arrived on Tuesday. A man in a heavy coat knocked on Harold's door and asked him to confirm his name. Harold did. The man handed him an envelope and walked back down the steps without conversation, boots crunching in the snow. Harold closed the door, stared at the envelope, and felt his pulse jump for the first time in days. He took the envelope to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened it carefully. Petition for guardianship. Aaron's name was on it. Mark's name was on it. The document claimed Harold was unable to manage personal and financial affairs. It listed incidents of confusion and risk factors. It requested an evaluation. It requested a hearing. And it had a date. 2 weeks. 2 weeks for Aaron and Mark to try to convince a court that Harold Benson, who shoveled his own porch, managed his own bills, fixed neighbors' machines, was not capable. Harold's hands stayed steady, but his vision blurred for a second, not from tears, from rage. He breathed in, breathed out, then reached for the documentation folder. He placed the petition inside and wrote the date on the top margin of the first page. Then he called Daniel Kessler, the probate attorney. Kessler answered on the third ring. "Mr. Benson," he said, and his tone already carried weight. "I was expecting this." "How?" Harold asked. "Because this is what people do when money stops flowing," Kessler replied. "Listen to me. Don't panic. We respond. We bring proof. We control the narrative." Control the narrative. Harold stared at the printed text message again, the one that started it all. It sat on top of everything like the first domino. Kessler asked for details. When Aaron last visited, what threats were made, what documents were sent. Harold answered in plain, factual language. Good, Kessler said. You've been documenting. Keep doing that. Starting now, assume everything is evidence. That afternoon, Harold did something he never thought he'd need to do in his own life. He bought a small digital voice recorder at a local store, the kind people used for lectures. He placed it in the same drawer as his spare keys, not for drama, for protection. That night, Mark called. Harold let it go to voicemail. He didn't trust himself to keep calm in a live conversation, and he didn't trust Mark to tell the truth. The voicemail arrived 30 seconds later. Mark's voice was cold and controlled. Harold, we're going to do this the easy way or the hard way. If you cooperate, Aaron can keep the kids around you. If you fight, you won't see them. And don't think your little paperwork games will save you. The court will listen to us. Call back. Harold listened to it twice. Then he saved it. Then he played it on speaker and recorded it with the voice recorder as a backup. Then he wrote the date, time, and a summary on a fresh page and slid it into documentation. The next morning, Harold went to his primary care clinic, a simple outpatient office with fluorescent lights and winter coats hung on chairs. He checked in, sat in the waiting area, and watched other older people stare at the floor like they were trying not to be seen. Harold was seen. When the nurse called him back, Harold stood straight. He didn't shuffle. He didn't play weak. He explained the situation to the doctor in simple terms. I'm being threatened with guardianship, Harold said. I need an evaluation of my cognition and ability to live independently. The doctor looked surprised, then concerned. Are you having memory issues? She asked. No, Harold said. I'm having family issues. The doctor nodded slowly. She asked Harold questions. The date, the year, where he lived, who the president was. Harold answered without hesitation. She asked him to recall 3 words, to draw a clock face, to repeat a sentence. Harold did it, hands steady. At the end, the doctor wrote a note stating that Harold appeared cognitively intact, oriented, and capable of managing his affairs. She also documented that Harold requested the evaluation due to family conflict. Harold held that paper like a shield. Then he drove home and placed the doctor's note inside the attorney's sealed envelope, behind the trust papers, and made copies for the folder. The same afternoon, Frank came over and walked through Harold's house with him, not as an inspector, but as a witness. Frank noted the smoke detectors, the clean pathways, the working furnace, the stocked pantry. It's safe, Frank said. Harold nodded. I know. Then we show that, Frank replied. But Aaron and Mark didn't stop. On Thursday, Harold got a call from the school office where his grandkids went. The receptionist's voice sounded careful. Mr. Benson? She asked. We received a note from your daughter asking that you not pick up the children without prior approval. There's some concern. Harold's stomach dropped. Concern. The same word Aaron used like a blanket. What concern? Harold asked. The receptionist hesitated. She said there's conflict and she wants to be safe. Safe from what? A grandfather? Harold thanked the receptionist and hung up. He sat at the table, fists clenched under the surface, and stared at the documentation folder. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about isolation. If Aaron and Mark could cut him off from the kids, they could break him emotionally, and a broken man looks weak in court. Harold opened the folder and added the school call details. Then he wrote a line underneath. Goal. Make him look unstable by making him suffer. He didn't write it as a theory. He wrote it as a pattern. That night, snow fell heavier. The world outside turned quiet, white, and muffled. Harold sat alone at the table and looked at the envelope from the attorney. He could feel fear trying to creep in, fear of losing his home, fear of losing his name, fear of losing his grandchildren for good. Then he remembered the moral truth that had been hiding under all of it. Limits are not cruelty. Limits are dignity. And if Erin wanted a court, Harold was going to show up with something she couldn't fake. He was going to show up with proof. The next day, a piece of mail landed in Harold's box that wasn't meant for him. It was addressed to Mark. The envelope had bold red lettering, "Final Notice." Harold didn't open it at first. He turned it over, looked at the return address, and felt his jaw tighten. A credit card company. A collection department. How did Mark's collection mail end up at Harold's house? Then Harold remembered something Erin had done months earlier. She had insisted on updating addresses on some old paperwork, saying it would simplify things. Harold had shrugged at the time. Now it looked like a trap. If Mark had been routing financial mail through Harold's address, it could make it look like Harold was involved, or it could hide the debt from other eyes. Harold didn't guess. He documented. He photographed the envelope. He noted the date. He placed the unopened letter in a separate plastic sleeve inside documentation. Then he called Kessler again. Kessler listened, then said, "Bring that to the hearing. And Harold, keep your emotions steady. They will try to bait you into looking angry. Anger is their evidence when they have none." Harold stared at the snow outside. If Erin and Mark wanted him to explode, Harold would do the opposite. He would stay calm, and he would let their own desperation speak for them. The courthouse in Cuyahoga County didn't look like a place for family drama. It looked like stone, glass, metal detectors, and long hallways where everyone tried not to make eye contact. On the morning of the hearing, Cleveland was buried under fresh snow. Harold drove slowly, hands steady on the wheel, windshield wipers fighting the white. Frank rode with him, quiet, present. The attorney, Daniel Kessler, met them inside. Harold wore a clean button-down shirt and a winter coat that still smelled faintly of machine oil from years of work. He didn't dress to look rich. He dressed to look like himself. In the waiting area outside the courtroom, Erin sat with Mark. Erin held a folder of her own. Mark wore a sharp coat and a confident expression, like he was going to win an argument in a business meeting. When Erin saw Harold, her face shifted instantly into sadness. "Dad," she said softly, standing up. "Please, we don't want to fight." Harold looked at her for a long second. How long had she been rehearsing that voice? Kessler stepped between them slightly, polite but firm. "There will be no direct contact before the hearing," he said. Mark scoffed under his breath. "He's been manipulated," he muttered. Harold didn't respond. The bailiff called their case, and everyone filed into the courtroom. The judge was a woman with tired eyes and a voice that didn't leave room for theater. She had seen families lie before. She had seen real dementia, real danger, real exploitation. She didn't look impressed by emotion alone. Erin's attorney spoke first. He described Harold as a vulnerable senior who was refusing help, making impulsive financial decisions, and potentially being taken advantage of by outsiders. Outsiders. Frank's jaw tightened, but Harold kept his face still. Then Erin spoke. She didn't cry yet. She saved that for later. She talked about her mother's death, about how Harold had changed, about how he was isolated, about how he had pushed away his own family. Then Mark spoke, voice calm and confident. He described Harold as stubborn, confused, and unsafe. He mentioned Harold forgetting things and getting angry. He framed the closed joint account as proof. Harold couldn't manage money. The judge listened, then looked at Harold. "Mr. Benson," she said, "do you understand why we're here?" Harold stood up slowly. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "They want control over my life." The courtroom got quiet. The judge nodded. "Do you agree you need a guardian?" "No, ma'am," Harold said. Kessler stood. "Your Honor," he said, "we have documentation to show Mr. Benson is competent and that this petition is retaliatory. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Kessler began with the simplest piece of evidence. He placed a printed page on the table and handed a copy to the judge. The text message. Don't expect us to take care of you. We have our own life. The judge read it. Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Kessler spoke plainly. This was sent by the petitioner. Mr. Benson replied with one word. Okay. After that, money access was cut off. Then this guardianship petition was filed. Aaron's attorney objected. Irrelevant. Family conflict doesn't equal capacity. Kessler nodded. Correct. That's why we also have medical and financial evidence. He presented the doctor's evaluation. The judge read the note, then asked Harold a few questions herself. Harold answered clearly. Then Kessler presented the KeyBank transaction logs. He showed the transfers out of the joint account and the bank's internal notes. Aaron asking about limits, asking what would trigger a fraud alert. The judge looked up at Aaron. Ms. Benson, she said, did you move funds without Mr. Benson's permission? Aaron's face tightened. It was an emergency, she said quickly. We plan to return it. The judge's voice stayed flat. That's not the question. Did you have permission? Aaron hesitated. Mark leaned forward as if to help. Kessler stepped in. Your Honor, we also have an email demanding Mr. Benson sign financial authorization forms today. He handed it over. The judge read the message from Mark. We need this in place for your safety. Sign and send back today. The judge's eyes lifted to Mark. Mr. Sloan, she said, why did you pressure him to sign authority documents immediately? Mark swallowed. We were concerned, he said. If something happened. The judge cut him off. Concern does not justify coercion. Then Kessler played the voicemail. Mark's voice filled the courtroom, clean and cold. We're going to do this the easy way or the hard way. If you fight, you won't see them. Aaron's face went pale. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge held up a hand. Stop, she said after a few seconds. Silence. The judge looked at Aaron again. Do you understand what that sounds like? She asked. Aaron's voice shook now, but not with grief. With fear. That was Mark, she whispered. The judge's gaze didn't soften. You filed the petition, she said. You are responsible for what you bring into this court. Kessler wasn't done. He introduced Frank as a witness. Frank testified about Harold's routine, his independence, his home safety, and the Saturday confrontation where guardianship was threatened as retaliation. Frank spoke without drama. He spoke like a man describing facts. Then Kessler introduced a final piece, the misdirected final notice envelope addressed to Mark at Harold's address, along with photographs and notes showing it arrived at Harold's home. Kessler didn't claim things he couldn't prove. He simply asked the obvious question out loud. Why would Mr. Sloan's collection mail be routed to Mr. Benson's home? He asked. Mark's jaw clenched. I don't know, he said. The judge stared at him. You don't know where your mail goes? She asked. Mark didn't answer. The judge leaned forward slightly. This court does not exist to help adults solve debt by taking power from a competent senior, she said. Her voice remained calm, but the words were heavy. Aaron's attorney tried to pivot. Your Honor, even if mistakes were made, the petitioner still believes Mr. Benson is at risk. The judge's eyes narrowed. Belief is not evidence, she said. She looked at Harold. Mr. Benson, do you want contact with your daughter and grandchildren? Harold's throat tightened. He chose his words carefully. He wants peace, Kessler said softly, letting Harold lead. Harold nodded and spoke. He wants the kids safe. He wants respectful contact. but he will not sign away his life to keep the peace. The judge sat back. Then she made the decision. The petition for guardianship was denied. The judge added conditions. Aaron and Mark were ordered not to access Harold's accounts, not to present documents for signature without independent counsel, and not to interfere with Harold's lawful relationships without cause. And then, with one final look at Aaron, the judge said something that hit the room like a gavel. "Miss Benson," she said, "if you attempt this again without true evidence, this court will consider sanctions." Aaron's face crumpled. Mark stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Harold didn't celebrate. He didn't smile big. He simply breathed. Because in that moment, the truth had been read out loud, and paper had done what Harold needed it to do. It had waited, and then it had spoken. Outside the courthouse, snow was still falling, soft and steady, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Aaron and Mark walked out with their heads down, avoiding eyes. Harold walked out with Frank and Kessler, shoulders slightly straighter than when he had entered. Kessler spoke quietly as they reached the steps. "You did well," he said. "You stayed calm." Harold nodded. "He had to," he said, and even in third person the truth was simple. Anger would have been Aaron's evidence. Calm was Harold's. In the weeks that followed, the consequences didn't come all at once. They came in small collapses. At church, Aaron showed up alone the first Sunday after the hearing. She sat in the back, eyes swollen. People noticed. People whispered, but not the way Aaron wanted. Pastor Lewis spoke to her after service. Not loudly, not publicly, but with the quiet firmness of a man who had read the truth through the cracks. Frank later told Harold, "The pastor didn't condemn her. He asked her a question she couldn't answer." "What kind of question?" Frank didn't repeat it exactly, but Harold could imagine it. "Why would you take from him?" In the neighborhood word spread too. Donna at the diner didn't gossip, but she watched faces. She watched who came in alone, who came in angry, who came in looking for sympathy and finding none. One afternoon, Mark walked into the diner by himself, shoulders tense, and ordered coffee. Donna poured it and walked away without small talk. Mark tried to make eye contact with the men at the counter. Nobody leaned in. The room didn't attack him. It didn't need to. It simply didn't offer him a stage. The real crash came with money. The joint account was gone. The trust was in place. The pressure valve had been shut. Without Harold's quiet safety net, Aaron and Mark had to face what they had built. Credit card balances stacked like hidden rust under paint, monthly payments they couldn't cover, and a lifestyle that had been held up by borrowing from tomorrow. Harold didn't know every detail at first. He didn't need to. He saw hints. A voicemail from an unknown number calling Mark's name and asking for a call back regarding urgent financial matters. A certified letter delivered to Aaron's address and refused. A conversation overheard at the diner about Mark's wages being hit. Then Frank called Harold one evening, voice low. "I heard something," Frank said. "What?" Harold asked. "Mark's job," Frank said. "He's been missing days. Stress, talking to HR. Someone said there might be a garnishment." Harold closed his eyes for a second. It wasn't joy he felt. It was a heavy confirmation. Debt doesn't care about pride. Debt collects. Aaron called once, late at night, voice small. "Dad," she said, and for the first time in months she sounded like a daughter and not a manager. "Can we talk?" Harold didn't answer right away. He looked at the documentation folder, now thick, now worn at the corners from use. "How?" he asked. Aaron swallowed. "Just talk. No lawyers, no fighting." Harold's voice stayed calm. "If you want to talk, you can talk," he said. "But the boundaries stay." Aaron's breath hitched. "I didn't mean that text." she whispered. Harold stared at the wall where a family photo hung. He could see Susan's smile in his mind like a bright spot in a gray winter. That text exists, Harold said quietly, and it changed things. Erin started to cry then, real tears this time. We were drowning, she said. Mark kept saying it would be fine if we just got through a few months. Harold listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't comfort her with promises. How long had this been planned? He asked, voice even. Erin went silent. Harold didn't push. Silence was an answer, too. Erin finally whispered, I didn't think you'd fight. Harold's voice stayed steady. He didn't fight to hurt you, he said. He fought to keep his dignity. Erin sniffed. What about the kids? She asked, and there it was again, the last lever. Harold's throat tightened. He loves them, he said, but he won't be controlled by that love. Erin's voice broke. I don't know how to fix this, she said. Harold's answer was simple, practical, and painful. Start with honesty, he said, and stop using people. Erin didn't argue. She didn't threaten. She just whispered, okay, and hung up. Harold sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, listening to the quiet house. He didn't feel victorious. He felt older. But he also felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. Because the court had denied guardianship, but more importantly, Harold had denied the lie that family gets to do anything to you and call it love. The consequences for Erin and Mark weren't a dramatic downfall on TV. They were real. Bills. Shame. Lost access. The slow crumble that comes when a shortcut stops working. And for Harold, the win wasn't revenge. It was breathing in his own home without fear. A few days after Erin's call, Harold met with Kessler again. Not in crisis this time. In planning. Kessler reviewed the trust documents, then asked, Do you want to adjust anything now that the guardianship petition is denied? Harold thought about the kids. He thought about Erin's tears. He thought about Mark's voicemail. I want the kids protected, Harold said again. No direct access through Erin or Mark. Kessler nodded. We can create an education subtrust, he said. Tuition, books, medical needs. Distributions require receipts. It keeps the purpose clean. Harold signed the update. His signature didn't punish his grandchildren. It shielded them from the adults around them. On the way home, Harold stopped at the diner. Donna poured his coffee and finally spoke the words she had been holding. I heard you stood up for yourself, she said quietly. Harold didn't smile much. He did, he said. Donna nodded. Good. Because some people think old means disposable. It doesn't. That afternoon, a small envelope appeared in Harold's mailbox. It wasn't from Erin. It was from one of the grandkids, handwriting shaky and uneven. Inside was a drawing, a stick figure Grandpa in a big coat, standing under a snow cloud, with a little heart drawn next to him. Harold stared at it for a long time. He didn't know if Erin had allowed the letter out of guilt or strategy. He didn't know if the child had begged. He only knew the drawing was real. He placed it in the documentation folder anyway, not as evidence against a child, but as a reminder of what mattered. Later that week, Mark tried one more time to control the story. He called Frank and left a message saying Harold was being influenced by church people and that family matters should stay private. Frank played the message for Harold and shook his head. He's still trying to isolate you, Frank said. Harold's eyes hardened. Then he's still afraid, he replied. Because a man who tells the truth doesn't fear witnesses, and Mark feared them all. Spring didn't arrive quickly in Cleveland, but the light changed before the snow fully disappeared. One morning, Harold noticed the sun hitting the kitchen floor in a way it hadn't in months. It wasn't warm yet, but it was different. The house still held grief, but it also held something else now. Ownership, not of property. of self. Harold kept the same routines. He still walked most mornings, even when the sidewalks were slick and the wind off Lake Erie felt like a blade. He still fixed things for neighbors: door latches, loose railings, a furnace that coughed at night. He still drank coffee at the diner and nodded at the same faces, but the fear was gone. He didn't jump when the phone rang. He didn't dread the mail. He didn't imagine strangers taking him from his home. Because he had built something stronger than anger. He had built boundaries. At church, Harold started staying longer after service. Not because he suddenly loved small talk, because he understood something that grief had tried to hide. Community isn't a decoration. It's protection. Pastor Lewis asked Harold one day, "Would you be willing to help with the church maintenance list? We've got older members who can't fix things, and the budget's tight." Harold nodded. "He can do that," he said. Soon Harold had a simple system: a clipboard, a list, a tool bag. He handled small repairs, and when something was too big, he coordinated help. People thanked him, and he accepted the thanks without discomfort. It wasn't charity, it was purpose. The documentation folder didn't disappear. Harold didn't burn it in a dramatic moment. He kept it in a drawer because that's what responsible people do with proof. But he didn't open it every day anymore. It had done its job. One Saturday, months after the hearing, Erin called again. This time, her voice didn't carry a script. "Dad," she said softly, "can I bring the kids by? Just for a short visit. No Mark." Harold's chest tightened, but he didn't let it make the decision for him. He paused and asked one question. "Are you willing to respect the boundaries?" he said. Erin was quiet for a second. Then she answered, small and honest. "Yes," she said. Harold agreed to a short visit at the diner first. Public, safe, simple. When Erin arrived with the kids, she looked tired. Not the tired of winter, the tired of consequences. The kids ran ahead, excited, and Harold stood up from the booth and hugged them, careful, steady. Erin sat down across from him, hands wrapped around a mug like she needed heat from something. For a few minutes, nobody talked about court. Nobody talked about money. They talked about school, about a science project, about how the snow had finally started to melt. Then Erin cleared her throat. "Dad," she said, and her eyes filled. "I'm sorry." Harold watched her, waiting to see if it was apology or strategy. Erin continued. "I let Mark convince me that you would be fine no matter what, that you were strong enough to handle anything. And then I used that as an excuse to take from you." Harold's jaw tightened. "Why?" he asked, not loud, just direct. Erin swallowed. "Because we were drowning," she said. "And because I thought inheritance was like a safety net that was already ours." Harold's expression didn't soften, but his voice stayed calm. "Nothing is already yours," he said. "Not my money, not my house, not my life." Erin nodded, tears falling. "I know," she whispered. Harold didn't forgive with fireworks. He didn't deliver a speech. He did what he had always done. He kept it practical. "If you want a relationship," he said, "it's built on respect. The kids can be in my life. You can be in my life. But no threats. No papers. No control games." Erin nodded again. "Okay," she said. That word returned, full circle, but this time it wasn't dismissal. It was acceptance. Harold watched the kids laugh over pancakes and felt the ache in his chest ease a little. Not disappear, but soften into something livable. Over the next months the visits stayed controlled and steady. Some weeks Erin canceled. Some weeks she showed up. Harold didn't chase. He didn't beg. He let her show, through action, what she was willing to be. Mark didn't appear. Harold didn't ask about him. That boundary stayed firm, and Harold's life filled with other things too. Neighbors who needed help, church members who needed repairs, diner mornings where Donna asked, "You good today?" And Harold could honestly say, "Yeah." He learned something late in life that many people never learn at all. Love without limits becomes a weapon. Limits, placed with dignity, can turn love back into something safe. So here's the question for anyone listening right now. If your own family told you, "Don't expect us to take care of you," would you collapse? Or would you do what Harold did and take your power back with calm, smart steps? If this story hit you, hit like, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. And in the comments, answer this. Where do you draw the line between helping family and protecting your dignity? One evening, Harold drove to the cemetery where Susan was buried. The ground was still hard, and patches of snow clung to the edges of the headstones. He stood in front of her marker with his hands in his coat pockets, wind brushing his face. He didn't talk like a man performing grief. He talked like a man reporting to the person who had been his partner. "They tried," Harold said quietly, "but it didn't work." He paused, eyes on the carved letters of her name. "You were right," he added. Boundaries early. The wind carried his words away, but the act of saying them anchored something inside him. Susan was gone. The loneliness still existed. But Harold wasn't alone in the way that mattered. He had witnesses now. He had community. He had legal protection. He had his own clear mind. Back at home, Harold did one more practical thing. He bought a small fireproof lockbox and placed the attorney's envelope inside. Trust papers, doctor's evaluation, and a printed list of contacts. He wrote the combination down and gave it to Frank in a sealed note, not because he feared death, because planning is dignity too. At church, Harold started a small Saturday fix-it table in the basement once a month. People brought wobbly chair legs, broken lamps, squeaky doors. Harold didn't charge. He showed them how to tighten screws, how to check a fuse, how to not be afraid of small problems. A younger man watched him one day and said, "My grandpa used to do that." Harold smiled softly. "Then you can learn," he replied. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, Harold's identity shifted from the old man who might need help to the man who helps. That was the real rebuild, not a new house, a new place in the world. Because dignity isn't just what you defend, it's what you practice, day after day, even when winter is heavy and the people you love try to pull you into their storm.